Welcome back to the finale of the TOC PF Finals 2025 round analysis. In this video, I'll be analyzing the summaries and the final focus speeches from both sides, as well as the RFDs and what both teams could have done better, possibly to change the result on Plano's side as well. By the end of this video combined with parts 1 and 2, which you should go watch, will hopefully be, I think, the most comprehensive debate round analysis on YouTube. I'm hoping that it will be useful and educational for all sorts of debaters, and specifically this part of the round analysis, the back half analysis that you're watching right now, will almost certainly be the most helpful out of the three parts. Because of all of this, I want to take the opportunity now to give a quick lesson on how I think tech debate works and how summary and final focus specifically work in tech rounds, so that we can all be on the same page going into the actual analysis and no one's like left behind by foreign concepts. So first, very brief lesson, how to give a summary and final focus. Basically, these are the same speeches. They're just 1 minute different, and one comes after the other. Everyone does it differently, but a useful pattern, in my opinion, that you can follow is 4 steps on any offense and then 4 steps on any defense. Offense is reasons that the resolution creates some important change. Your offense means the arguments that you have given about why the resolution has created an important change that supports your side. For example, a benefit if you're pro or a harm if you're con. Defense is just the opposite. It takes the form of arguments that negate the truth of offense, saying that things don't change in this way or they don't at least change in some important manner. On offense, for a summary or final focus speech, step 1 is you should pick your most favorable offensive argument because you likely are not going to have time for everything. You either have 3 minutes or 2 minutes. That's not enough to synthesize all of the 16 minutes before you. So you should probably just pick one argument. I do say like one argument singular, and I do mean it. Technically, you can use multiple offensive arguments in summary or final focus. This just would require you to repeat steps 1 through 4 for all of them independently as well. So step 1 is pick your best offense. Step 2 is to explain the offense again as completely as you think the judges in the round will consider necessary. Step 3 is to defend your offense against any responses that might apply as defense. So that includes obviously purely defensive responses that the opponents made in their rebuttal, but it also includes things like turns, for example, which also have defensive implications, and certain types of weighing like short circuits, which also apply defensively but are conditional upon some of the opponent's arguments being true. Step 4 is to compare the strength of your offense against the strength of any offense the opponent could still potentially use to win the round at this point, assuming that you have no defense whatsoever against it, and therefore assuming that their best case scenario is true. These 4 steps together can be called, collapsing, extending, frontlining, and weighing. So collapsing is picking your argument, extending is explaining it again, frontlining is this fancy term for defending it, and weighing is comparing it against the best case offense from the other team, assuming that none of your defensive responses are true. The 4 steps for defense are very similar. The first 3 are actually literally the same. So pick at least one defensive response against each of the offensive arguments they can still use in the round, then explain the response again, and then respond to any of their front lines or point out that they had none. Step 4 is a little bit different. I call it implication, and it basically means explaining why this response is so powerful or devastating in the round. What does this response do to their arguments? And ultimately, what does it do to change the judge's decision in the round as well? For example, we can think of defense as having a mitigatory implication if it just sort of lowers the weight of their offense partially by showing that it is less likely to be true or it's less important if it is true. Or it could have a terminal implication if the truth of the defensive response entails that the offensive argument to which it applies is like totally false and therefore doesn't just have less weight, but now you've pushed that weight down to 0. It's not something that can even be considered in the round anymore because, for example, maybe it's just a fake argument. Not that it probably won't happen, but it will not happen. That's the difference between mitigatory and terminal in this case. There are 4 ways to technically win a debate round. So switching gears a little bit, that's the advice for how to give a summary and final focus. Here's why you're doing each of those things. So here's how you win a technical debate round. I think there's 4 ways, basically. 1, if both teams have offense and you explicitly win weighing, you win. Either because you're the only team that explicitly attempted weighing, or because both teams attempted weighing and you somehow proved that your weighing was better or more true than their weighing. 2, if you have offense and the other team does not, you win. For example, if you win offense and terminal defense, then they don't have offense, you do, so you win. 3, if both teams have offense, but neither team has weighing in the round. You win if the judge thinks that your argument is more important, given some of the shared assumptions in the debate. For example, some judges will vote based on which argument has less ink on it throughout the debate, even if the ink on the other argument is weakly mitigatory or not really implicated as weighing. They'll find some part of the flow that they want to use to figure out the weighing if you haven't done it for them. 4, if neither team has any offense at all by the end. For example, if there's terminal defense on both teams, you win if the judge presumes that your side is correct by default. This scenario really should never, ever happen, but it can theoretically happen if neither team extends any offense into the back half, or if neither team reads any offense to begin with for some reason, or if both teams concede terminal defense and they agree that the defense can in fact be terminal, which is sort of up for debate as well. In any of those scenarios, the judges sort of become a bit unpredictable. Some judges may erase the terminal defense from both sides, considering them to sort of effectively cancel each other out. Like, okay, you have terminal defense, but you also have terminal defense. So, we both have terminal defense. I guess I can just sort of call it a day and cancel them out and just pretend that both of them go away to evaluate the rest of the debate as if there was no terminal defense. I know some judges who do that. In which case, if this happens, their decision moves back up to like number 3, and they just find some way to vote on weighing that didn't quite exist. Or hopefully you've done that weighing, and then that becomes an easy decision for them. Otherwise, many judges, I think, just default to the con side. Some judges default to the first speaking team, and teams on either side can also make additional arguments about why the judge should default to their side. There are even some like default pro arguments that exist. But this is like a really weird niche scenario that probably should never happen. In my opinion, though, all 4 of these different things, these different ways or scenarios in which you can win, are basically the same thing. Fundamentally, they are all the same. This statement encapsulates all 4. You win if you prove your offense is stronger within the shared assumptions of the debate. You win if you prove your offense is stronger within the shared assumptions of the debate. Shout out to Sophie Rukin for helping me really understand this aspect of technical debate. If you haven't watched my latest video where I interview her, you should go watch it. She's the first person to ever top speak APTA Nationals as a freshman and has some really unique perspectives about technical debate that I think are very useful to apply to PF as well. What do I mean by the shared assumptions of the debate? Because this is maybe the part that's a bit foreign for a lot of people. Every debate round functionally has infinite assumptions, right? Debate is a game, logic is possible, nuclear energy exists, Trump is the president, death is bad, consequences matter, prediction is possible, defense can be terminal, dropped arguments are 100% probable, etc. All of those are assumptions. Most of these are agreed upon by both teams. The funky thing is, most of those agreements are implied by your actions in the round and the context in which the round occurs, rather than actually like agreed upon explicitly. For example, answering a response by saying, in this particular case, even if the response is true, it's not terminal because they have conceded an empiric that it has succeeded in the past despite this response having been true. That implies several agreements with the team originally reading those supposedly terminal defense. For example, even though this is not logically entailed by this response, you have implied that you believe some defense can, in some circumstances, be terminal. Assumptions like this can be facts, like nuclear energy currently relies on fission, paradigm issues like IVIs are legitimate arguments, and even value judgments like suffering is bad and should be avoided. The key is that these shared assumptions don't have to be explicitly stated to have a very real effect on a technical debate. And indeed, they almost never are if you really think about it to the logical extreme. Assumptions are laid bare more often through the acknowledgement of an argument containing an assumption that does not dispute the assumption that was contained through the explicit assertion of the assumption in the round. Um, I think that assumptions obviously are no longer shared when they are explicitly or even implicitly challenged. If it does become clear that the teams in a debate do not agree, for example, that defense can be terminal, even if neither team explicitly says that defense can or cannot be terminal, then this is no longer a shared assumption in the round. The reason that shared assumptions matter is because, consciously or not, they influence what a technical judge considers to be interventionist within a given round. Voting in a way that violates a shared assumption is an act of intervening on the debate that was actually had, and it renders an unpredictable decision that neither team actually like willed to happen. So it takes the debate out of the hands of the debaters. This, I think, does a good job of helping explain why, for example, it like feels really weird for a technical judge to go to a debate tournament in North Dakota's local circuit where there's like no norm that back half speeches require extensions. There's no concept of presumption and, vote con. It would be weird to go there and like vote con 5 rounds in a row because neither team extended in the offense, and you believe that presumption favors the con. Like this feels very interventionist, right? Because it is interventionist, in fact, because in those circumstances, you are intervening against the implicitly shared assumptions that exist in the round between both of the teams. That, for example, back half speeches don't require extensions, even if the circuit you are familiar with has those shared assumptions that say the opposite. This is also why I think tech judges change their evaluations of how rounds actually work at NSDA, for example. This is very common. A technical judge will like change their paradigm or tweak it, or at least apply their paradigm differently at NSDA nationals, because it's a place where many insulated local circuits clash with teams that are familiar with national circuit norms in ways that create a lot of disagreements about shared assumptions, like, or I guess no longer shared assumptions, right? Disagreements about assumptions that usually are shared within each of those circuits respectively. It's not because we all suddenly decide that we're not tech anymore that we do this. It's exactly because we are tech that we adapt ourselves to the now shifted set of shared assumptions in these rounds so that we can render the most predictable decisions possible that align most with the agency and the will of the teams that are actually debating in the round. Given the circumstances of TOC finals, so back to the actual round analysis now, we can pinpoint, I think, certain shared assumptions underlying this round. For example, we know probably that, or we can guess, we can intuit pretty strongly that all of the debaters and the judges here probably agree that summary and final focus extensions are required for offense to be voted on. They probably also agree that defense can be terminal, given the treatment that we saw of defense by both teams prior in the round and the context of the circuit at the time, making this shared assumption a pretty predictable default in the absence of any explicit negation of it. However, in this round, there are some common shared assumptions on the national circuit that actually were ruptured by Plano. For example, the shared assumption that extinction comes first has been challenged in this round. The shared assumption that winning a link guarantees 100% probability has also been challenged. And the shared assumption that time frame comes first in extinction debates has finally also been challenged. These are no longer shared assumptions. That doesn't mean that they aren't true in the round. It just means that they're no longer something that can just be assumed as a default without being stated, and they now have to be warranted and defended against challenges. At this point in the round, let's think about where we're at. You should hopefully have a flow or maybe remember some of the speeches that happened before. Maybe you're coming just from the other videos on my round analysis before, which covered the constructive speeches and the rebuttal speeches. So you should have some sense of where we're at in the round. Just as a reminder, I think there hasn't really been much collapsing yet in the round, although we know that Plano is probably going for climate because they explicitly conceded some defense on their first scenario about plutonium, although they're using the uniqueness scenario to try to apply to the politics DA. At this point in the round, I fully expect Strake is probably going to collapse on or go for their politics argument. They're probably going to go for weighing and defensive spikes that were sort of littered throughout their case and defensive arguments in the rebuttal. This basically gives them two ways that they can win. So one, they can win if they win politics and weighing, or two, they can win if they win politics and terminal defense. If you don't believe in terminal defense, like honestly, I don't really believe in terminal defense, you could still think of this as two ways to vote for them. Either one, politics outweighs on its own, or two, politics outweighs only with the help of mitigation that's defensive. But based on the assumptions that seem to be shared between the two teams debating here, the least interventionist decision probably should assume that defense can be terminal, though there remains a question of whether or not it is for each piece of defense is extended in this round. Either way, I expect Drake to go for politics and go for defense and go for weighing. Those are probably going to be the three main components of this round. And then there's one more thing that they have to make sure they don't drop, which is this weird like IVI turn that Anuj read, I think, very smartly in the second rebuttal. And if they can handle that and then do all of these three things, win politics, win either one of weighing or terminal defense, then they should have a pretty easy shot at winning the round. So let's watch Daniel's summary and see what he actually does. Okay, let's watch Strake's summary together. I've actually already flowed it, so I'm just gonna like bounce back and forth between the video and my pre-existing flow of the summary and try to describe what I think is happening here. So let's watch it together. Okay, starting on the IVI. So I think this is smart, right? Like this is one of the only, there's only two ways Plano wins this round. Because I don't think that there were any turns that I can remember in the rebuttal, which means that they can only win on warming or the warming IVI. And so it's good to just get the IVI out of the way early. If you drop it, it might be very annoying. It would be sort of a free way for Plano to maybe win, assuming the judges don't intervene. So, especially because it was Strake who originally said Fiat is illusory, this comes first. So it's probably good to just get it out of the way. So Daniel now makes about five different responses that I identified. So let's see what he says. Not existential because of intervening actors. There is no impact to the review. Our thesis demonstrates that it is not affecting real world perception. Scientific analysts say mortality is down 98%. We've cited authors that warming is not existential and governments are acting now in belief that climate is not existential and doesn't hold progress. Assuming no reason why this is drop the debater and use time for substance. But check this, both sides didn't allocate any time and they still conceded the impact even about adaptation and green transition now, and that the 40 degrees has not been essential for 40 years because adaptation and new green technology would boost our solvency, and they didn't extend their arguments to the second one, which means they don't have any piece offense. Okay, so lots of stuff here, which is interesting. I might have even missed one. I heard him say like there's no impact to pre-fiat arguments because like we don't actually change our minds. So maybe we can put that in here. I think that's kind of in here as well. No impact pre-fiat. We don't change our minds. And then all this other stuff too, right? Like there's no impact because it's not existential. So if we win the impact defense, we prevent the impact of this IVI. I'm not 100% sure that's true, but there's so much ink here that it probably doesn't matter very much. Like, there's so much other stuff about, like, no drop the debater, not enough time spent here. That's a little bit weak. All of this, I think each of these responses is a little bit weak on its own, but it's just so many so efficiently. That given the amount of time that Plano actually put into reading this turn in the first place, I think this is more than enough to dissuade them from going for it, which is exactly what Strake wants. Like it means that there are enough options open to Strake if Plano for some reason does pull a fast one and go all in on the IVI. That in the final focus, like they have a lot of different arguments that they can blow up that aren't necessarily new because of the spam that happened in the summary. So I think this is smart. There's one thing that happens right under, which is sneaky, and I don't really understand, which he says they don't have any offense because they didn't extend anything in the second rebuttal. Since when do you have to extend offense in the second rebuttal? This is okay. This is actually a really good example of one of these shared assumptions things because this is not in the judge's RFD, even though it technically is in this speech, and I think it might even be in Strake's final focus. Because this is clearly not a shared assumption, right? Like, even though I think Plato drops this, like, there's no response against no second rebuttal extensions that I can remember. Maybe Armand says we did extend through front lines in the next speech. I don't completely remember, but this is something that like clearly does not seem to be a shared assumption. And I also don't know why it would be, but given that it's not a shared assumption, it needs a warrant for sure, because I don't know why, like it's just sort of said. And I don't know why second rebuttal should require extensions for the offense to be viable, given that this hasn't been a norm in PF for at least, forever, as far as I'm aware, unless this is a brand new norm like this year specifically. But I don't think any of the judges' paradigms said that they require extensions in the second rebuttal. So I'm a little bit confused by why this exists without a warrant. It kind of feels like a bit of a trick, but maybe I'm just not understanding it fully. Let's see what the rest of the speech does. So, I mean, okay, he's dealt with the IVI. Now we predict that he's going to go for politics and then go for a combination of weighing and defense. On the bubble, there will be no recession. There evidence that we're controlling inflation is a minuscule chance I'll keep the impact because what resolve recession on policies are sent policy. Okay, I guess he's covering the bubble. I don't think this is that necessary, but to be fair, he only spends like 10 seconds here. The treatment is there just to close the door on any potential turns. I don't think there are any potential turns on the bubble argument or any other ways that it could cross apply anywhere. But Plano might, they're known for doing sneaky things with cross applications. So maybe he's just really making sure there's no possibility. The only possibility that could arise is like if somehow Plano linked into the econ decline argument and then tried to like steal the impact. So he's conceding the impact defense to prevent them from being able to steal and weigh that impact. And he's also making sure that if they do somehow go for some kind of econ argument, that there's no uniqueness on it, because he's making the argument that it's unlikely that there's going to be an economic decline in the status quo. I don't really think this is that strategic though. I think that there's basically like if Plano goes for somehow goes for an econ argument, which I don't think they can. Like I think that would be a horrible strategic decision from Plano, even without this, to the extent that it probably would lose them the round, even if none of this is there. So I don't know. I don't really know what the point of this is, but I guess he's just trying to really cover all of his bases. I actually think it would be more strategic to concede arguments in a different way. On the bubbles argument, like for example, he could spend the exact same amount of time, maybe like add 5 seconds or something, to instead say all of their arguments agree that there's an inevitable econ decline, but they've conceded that that econ decline destroys the market for nuclear energy, which takes out their solvency on warming, because it means that there will inevitably be a bubble pop in nuclear energy, which will destroy that sector and destroy the industry, preventing a full green tech transition using nuclear energy, which decks their solvency. We will concede also that econ decline doesn't cause war, but it definitely causes the short circuit, which, even if inevitable, is still a short circuit that becomes a solvency deficit on the ath. I think that would have been smarter, but it doesn't really matter. That's just extra defense, and I'm sure he's gonna dig up defense elsewhere on the flow anyway.
Fully conceded that currently the contribution reconciliation measure will pass now. However, as soon as you affirm, it means that
Right.
it
So
goes to negative favorability.
politics.
Our argument is not at all about lobbying. Rather, it is that Trump becomes left. Trump, the extreme Republicans, we feel that have been left behind. And it also means that force trading cannot occur. There are blocks in the government that prevent the reconciliation from going through, which prevents the renewal of the STARTS agreement, which re-innovates our defense industrial base and deters China. Their argument is about nuclear not working, but our argument starts about deterring the Chinese conventional capabilities, which has nothing to do with American nuclear. It is that
Okay, so right now he says they have an argument about nuclear not working. This, as far as I'm aware, was the uniqueness from the plutonium argument, that says our nuclear umbrella is dead. So he's hopping back over to the pro flow because Anuj cross-applied it to politics, and he's making all of these responses that says that, we have conventional links. It's not all about our nuclear umbrella. So our argument still applies, even if this uniqueness is true. And let's see the rest of what he says.
China will strike first, which causes a nuclear war by drawing in existential actors and causing a great power war that will kill us with bioweapons, not necessarily American nuclear. The first thing they say is that
And he says it will kill people with bioweapons. This is interesting. I guess I don't think there was ever any evidence in the round that said anything about bioweapons. But whether or not there needs to be is a whole other question. But this does seem to be asserted without a card. Maybe it's because like normally I think when people, including Strake, read these arguments, there's like a Claire card that says bioweapons cause extinction as well within the Great Power War impact scenario. That was not read in this round, so this might be sort of new, but I don't know that it really matters. It's also technically a response to a new cross application, so maybe it's okay that it's new, but it's also a new impact, so maybe it's not okay that it's new. But either way, I don't think it's entirely consequential.
diversification, but that is irrelevant. There are other
Okay, so now we're jumping back to the actual politics flow to make sure that he's frontlining everything. He starts with, they say, diversification, which was a response to oil lobbying as well as a response to the green paradox.
causes. Our argument is not at all about that, and it is about Republican infighting. They say lobbying right now, again, is not our argument, and that also name drops natural gas as the highest thing. They say spending bill. They conceded the uniqueness evidence as
So this is important because I was saying earlier how I think that this argument from Plano, this response is a little bit mishandled, about how the nuclear lobby is high now. The only response that does seem to apply is that natural gas is highest now, which is technically maybe a little bit new. I mean, this is a cross application of what the evidence in case actually says, but the cross application in Jason's rebuttal was about the oil lobby, which maybe is technically different. The reason that it matters in this round is because there's an argument about how the oil lobby will not lobby against nuclear energy because they can diversify into nuclear energy. And the response to diversification in this speech is just that it's irrelevant. But that's not true if it also answers the natural gas lobby. If you get me, right? Like, diversification is it's something that can backline Does that make sense? Yeah, they can backline the response about the nuclear lobby overwhelming the politics link. And so it's not therefore irrelevant. And so this treatment, I think, is a bit of a mistake.
That says that their evidence is number one, a snapshot, but two, specifically that will reduce, not increase the deficit. So this argument is being overcome, and the post-date.
This is kind of a lie about the evidence, unfortunately. It started like very minor in the rebuttal, but now we're just, I mean, this is just a mischaracterization of the evidence. I don't think it's like an intentional mischaracterization of the evidence, but it does happen to be strategic. But yeah, the evidence that was the uniqueness on the politics argument definitely does not say anything about how it will reduce the deficit. It says that there is one group of Republicans that wants to reduce the deficit. And that's actually a problem because definitely this bill increases the deficit. So I think this is just like a flat out, like kind of almost opposite interpretation of what the evidence actually says that is used for strategic gain in this round, which is unfortunate, but it's never called out. So I guess if you're not being an interventionist, then you just say, okay, well, it was dropped that this is the correct interpretation of the evidence. So I guess we're going with it.
On the plutonium argument, no, our indictment says that they didn't have the
Okay, now he's going back to the plutonium argument. I'm not entirely sure why, because I feel like he kind of already covered it, unless he wasn't intending to cover something else. Like maybe this was supposed to be about like the mad spike in the pro case against nuclear conflict. But either way, we get a new response to plutonium here, I guess, which is this one right here. It just doesn't apply, which is the same thing he said earlier.
for plutonium, but that doesn't answer our argument with China first striking due to conventional efforts. It was America, not China. The way that they dropped in rebuttal was winning an existential scenario that happens first.
Okay, now he's going to weighing, which they are definitely ahead on right now. So it's good to put the nail in the coffin.
For an independent insurance case argument means no absolute life is value, so we ought to preserve it. Life hours as long as possible. The best case in the process of stopping extinction. The act causes to have a quicker negative flip chart, dying drop. That was wrong with really weighing his interventions as everyone has different perceptions was also so default to time frame. The evidence is very explicit. It says that as soon as you affirm, and it means that that's perception has never happened before, that we have not reviewed our defense industrial base to catch up with inflation. It means a small confidence will instantly
Oh, I should add
means that we
this
cannot
below.
solve.
He said it's perceptual, which is a very common argument as to why it will be immediate. So I'll add that right here.
There are small conflicts. It is higher on the priority table for every single policymaker because even a small conflict is higher than climate change that they believe will happen in the next 2 decades versus a conflict that escalates immediately and link turns the affirmative instantly and the time.
And I should put here as well, um, climate happens in 20 years. So this is just the comparative on the time frame weighing, and he says this turns case because if there are these conventional conflicts, these hotspots that blow up because of a lack of US deterrence, because the reconciliation bill doesn't pass, because of the politics scenario, then these conflicts will be a higher priority for every policymaker, which prevents a focus in politics on climate solutions, which link turns the AF. I wish there was even more weighing here. Like technically this doesn't link turn the AF. Technically this is a link into the AF's impact scenario about warming. But the reason it doesn't link turn the AF is because it doesn't interact with the AF link, right? At least in this version, it doesn't interact with the AF link. And so the AF could still say, well, yes, maybe this is true that there are some conflicts in some places, and then those policymakers have less attention to climate solutions. But that doesn't really matter if we prove that nuclear energy being invested in is the best climate solution, and it's more important than any of those existing climate solutions that might get less focus as a result of these conflicts. So then we still have the best link into warming, even if it is true that their impact also has a link into warming. So the best way that you could actually weigh this and do the next step is to say not only does this have a link into warming, it's a better link into warming than the AF. One, because it short circuits somehow. I think Jason actually says in the next speech, like, this means that we in the US also cannot focus as much on nuclear energy, which would be a short circuit. But then also, I think you can just weigh it on scope, for example, right? Like, this means that every country around the world will focus less on climate solutions. So even if you're right that the US will focus more on climate solutions and those are very effective climate solutions, it won't matter if all of the other countries are focusing substantially less on climate solutions, then on net there is less global focus on effective climate solutions and there's more emissions, for example.
The implementation argument. Trump is sabotaging himself doing the LPO.
Okay, so this is the defense that we expected. So he's done. He's done. He covered the IVI. He's covered politics. He's covered weighing, and now he's covering defense, which sort of makes sense as an order of priority as well. So the defense he's choosing is coming from this contingent 3 about implementation, and he's going for the first scenario in implementation about the LPO. He has to get through this a few responses that sort of apply. So obviously the overview applies, which is that if there is an increase in investment, then this creates incentives to make it work. For example, like Trump will stake his reputation on this. And then there's also some other responses throughout here that kind of also apply, even though they're not made as explicit earlier on. For example, I think that some of these arguments about how there are 40 new reactors actively being built now, and that those are like being successful means that nuclear can work. And again, like the past empirics of projects being completed works. Um, but we'll see how he deals with all of this stuff.
After resigning the point of being ambassador, this office is purely central for project development. They've conceded that funding is irrelevant because they conceded that all unique expertise do not want to come back. Funding is irrelevant for this argument.
Okay, so I here on the flow, it's a bit confusing. He starts with all of this stuff that Trump is gutting the LPO and this causes incapacity. Then I put this down here. I think he's kind of responding to an argument that was mostly articulated right here in Anusha's rebuttal, where he said, if we give them more money, then maybe this will help them deal with some of these problems. So there's a lot of ink on this that Daniel is putting down now that says actually funding increasing does not matter. It does not address the LPO argument that is independent of financing. And then he'll go back up to address the Trump incentives argument as well.
Are going to get increased funding one time, but the things that manage the project down the line are dismantling viruses that those Trump's window of opportunity for polarization, causes souring on nuclear. They've also conceded that people would just retire. All of these arguments have not been responded. They say the government will look bad, but this is a measure that Trump is undertaking during the status quo. All the efforts went to Trump, making it harder for nuclear, which means that it cannot solve climate change and the warming gap. Don't believe the warming argument is conceded that perception is irrelevant because the technology has to work and be well regulated and permitted for it to innovate attack rates. They conceded all of the arguments. They said there's potential to decrease that. They conceded adaptation and emissions will increase because it takes so long.
Okay, I didn't really flow any of the things after the timer went off. I guess he technically extends like adaptation. Certainly the stuff about how nuclear takes too long is not in the speech time because it starts after the timer goes off, which is usually a way that judges can like test whether or not they should put on their flow in the first place. Like sometimes judges will usually let you finish your thought, but not start a new thought for sure. Um, but we still, to be fair, he was very smart about how he answered the IVI because the answers to the IVI contain the impact defense on warming, which is impact defense on substance as well. So the argument about adaptation, along with a lot of the cards about like 4 Celsius is not existential, 98% of climate deaths have been decreased. Those cards have already been extended in the context of the IVI, and it's trivially easy to just apply them to the warming scenario as well, which means that he doesn't really even have to extend them at the end, so it's okay that it's kind of over time. Although I guess the only difference is the one that says like no solvency because nuclear takes too long. That one's definitely not on the flow anymore. Okay, and so that's the end of Daniel's summary. I really think, like, honestly, I think this was an incredibly good summary. Very, very strategic. Did a lot on every part of the flow that puts Strake, I think, quite far ahead here. And very, very few mistakes. I think the biggest mistakes, arguably, and it's hard to even call this a mistake. I think that it's a little bit light on the treatment of the politics DA itself. Like some of this defense, I think, could have been covered better. We talked already about how the lobbying and diversification arguments kind of interact weirdly. And so there's a room there for Plano to push for some of these arguments. The same is true for Plano's evidence about increasing the deficit. Because here there's no argument that says even if it doesn't increase the deficit, it still will pass now. And so it would be also easy for Plano to go for this and just compare evidence against what seems to be non-existent evidence that it will actually decrease the deficit. And so either of those two paths seem like they could be potential terminal options, which would be very bad for Strake, because at this point in the round, the only way that Strake wins is if the politics argument has a link, or has uniqueness, or is true. If the politics argument is unworkable, then any of the two ways that they can win, which is politics plus weighing or politics plus defense, won't work. I guess, if they go for politics plus defense and then politics is not true, then they can still use terminal defense to say presume con. But that's the only other, like, again, that scenario should never really happen. And so this would be very, very bad for Strake. So I think that's the lightest part of the summary. But in general, like, I think this is probably the best speech in the round. It is very strategic. It's very efficient at covering every part of the flow. And the round vision is really, really good here. Especially putting a lot of ink on the weighing that Plano is already behind on, I think is really, really useful at sealing the deal on as long as they win politics, it seems like a pretty easy ballot for the con. So let's see how the pro summary deals with this. I'm just gonna skip by Crossfire, by the way. If people want me to analyze Crossfire, I guess I can like make a new video on it. There's some interesting things that happen in some of the Crossfires and some like strategic elements, but I think largely it's not super relevant for my treatment of the round. Although one thing that happened in the Grand Crossfire is like Strake pointed out that there was oh, in fact, that wasn't Crossfire at all, was it? I don't know what was happening there. But anyway, in the next Crossfire, something interesting does happen. We'll chat about it a tiny bit, but largely irrelevant. So let's see what Armand does. Okay.
Uniqueness of umbrellas was conceded, which takes out their second attention on the military. You conceded that the nukes are degrading right now, and the plutonium is the only thing they solve. You say other materials without red evidence of it, and explain how they solve. They have plutonium, of course, so what other material would solve? Takes like receipt too, because nuclear weapons are the best thing in order to reassure other allies have a stronger military. Other technologies do the same, because nuclear is the only thing that creates mutually assured destruction, which is the greatest deterrent against war possible. Now, going for the position two. We're not about to be climate targets now, but affirming it's
I don't think this is the most strategic use of time here because I think that like all of this stuff that Daniel said is largely conceded. I think if Armand wants to go for this, he needs to explain more how it does apply to the impact scenario, which was a very small part of this extension. And it should have been given a lot more time, given that that is the part that is actually attacked the most by Strake. So, yeah, I think that's a bit of a strategic misstep. Now that I think about it, I actually think there might be an angle here on this nuclear deterrence is going away non-unique argument because technically, like Daniel says all of these things about how it's about deterring China's conventional capabilities and it's about China's first strike, drawing in great powers, and it's about bioweapons. It doesn't apply to the conventional first strike, but I don't really know why that's true. Like nuclear weapons from the US presumably also have a deterrent effect on the conventional realm too. Like that's the whole point, right? Like that's why non-nuclear countries don't usually attack nuclear countries, is because nuclear weapons can deter them asymmetrically because they don't have nuclear weapons of their own. But also even if they do have nuclear weapons of their own, like this is just how deterrence works, right? Like if I have a bigger weapon than you that can inflict a lot of pain on you, then you are deterred from using even your smaller weapons. It doesn't seem to matter if it's conventional or nuclear or bioweapons or what. Like nuclear weapons do have a massive effect on deterrence between states, which means I don't know, like I don't know why this does not also non-unique the polit or the yeah the impact of the politics DA to some extent, even if all of these things that Daniel said are true. So I think there is actually an angle here. We just have to do more work to explain why this is somewhat terminal, which I don't think is in this speech. So a little bit more work explaining how it applies and why it applies, and also explicitly explaining like why it's terminal, why it's a big deal, would make this more strategic. I cheated a bit. I went ahead and I flowed the rest of the speech. Now I'm coming back to it, just so that I can explain without having to like pause so often to like type.
two. We're not about to be climate targets now, but affirming its skill up by recycling waste and increasing nuclear power outlets where waste is scalar impact against billions of people turn all other impacts because of knock-on effect. I'll extend the link. Go to the second link that trades over fossil fuels improved by Sweden, who got emissions by 75% in fossil fuels are the biggest driver of emissions. They say we didn't extend case in second rebuttal, but it was extended by a frontlining. The argument was pretty clear. They got the two arguments. They say
This is kind of weird. I don't know why we're sort of implicitly agreeing that we needed to extend case and second rebuttal. I feel like the first answer you should just say is no, we don't need to. And then also, yeah, we did through front lines. I don't know why we're allowing this to be an assumption in the round, but okay.
mitigation. One can see that we are doing mitigation right now. That was their evidence. Only future, like it always has a
When he says mitigation, I think he actually means adaptation. This is just responding to the adaptation defense.
could happen. Secondly, the developing countries don't have the money for mitigation, which means we still have offense off of them with 150 million people at the minimum. They say that it takes too long. We're not going for time frame, and then you can see that it'll be
This response was also over time in the summary, so probably this doesn't even matter.
has knock-on effects and as a scalar argument. I introduce other things like pandemics and resource wars, which means that we still have an impact if we're not going for extinction and not going for time frame. The wait, I'll do our wait first.
Okay, this is where things are weird because Armand does a lot of work on the weighing, but it's unclear how much of this is allowed given that there's this gap right here, right? Like there are two things that are conceded from the rebuttal that we need to deal with. One is that time frame comes first when it has a short circuit like extinction because it prevents the AF and preserving life longer is better, which I guess is sort of two arguments. Then secondly is that probability is subjective. It requires judge intervention because everyone has different ideas of what is probable. And these sort of three things are all dropped in Anusha's rebuttal. I think we need to say that. Like we need to acknowledge that in Armand's summary. I don't know that he knows this. But if he does, like he needs to acknowledge it. It's not that this is impossible to win. Like you can still come back from this. For example, you could say, yes, we conceded that time frame first with extinction would short circuit if that was 100% probable, but that's not the case. Like, my point is like there are ways of explaining what you did and did not concede and what is and is not allowed to be new. For example, you can say there are some new things in Daniel's summary, certainly that you get new responses to, and maybe those new responses also can sort of sneakily apply to some of the other stuff that you did concede. But this has to happen, right? Like we need to acknowledge that there are concessions here in order to treat it in a way that doesn't make it seem like everything is new and sort of out of place. But let's see what he
Blood
does.
probability is not subjective. This is empirical studies. We have read evidence to state the case of country responsible for every mass extinction event in history, even if their strength of link is 100%. Their real world probability is not 100%, which was a conceded weighing card out of case we haven't seen nuclear, but countries running people right now. Probability trumps magnitude and time frame because voting on high magnitude effects causes false paralysis. Does not both just have to do with infinite? If these scenarios we can't do anything, second climate change links to more.
Like this is a good example. Like, is this allowed? Like, can you say high voting on high magnitude impacts causes policy paralysis at this point in the round? Maybe the answer is yes. Like, I mean, most people think that it's okay to give new weighing in second summary, and this doesn't respond to some of the weighing that was given before, although maybe it sort of implicitly does. It's kind of unclear. So I think that, again, we need this acknowledgement to be able to explain what is and is not allowed in this speech.
Globally spread around the world, you drop, there's a scalar argument, and then every minute we wait is an increased chance of those knock-on effects always magnitude because it creates multiple hotspots around the world, various countries, up to things like resources and resource wars, and also monsoons are getting accomplished.
This is smart, but again, it only works if you're able to get through the time frame short circuit combo.
Used by weapon time frame is not absolute, it's not 100%. It's intervention to achieve time.
And this is how he's trying to do that. But again, it's unclear if this is allowed given the argument that was already conceded in a previous speech.
Especially with bioweapons, don't cause extinction immediately. It's not nuclear weapons, and they have not explained why they caused extinction in the last.
So this is smart. Like you could make a case that this is allowed because the pivot to bioweapons was new in the first summary. And I think he's right. There's no card on bioweapons cause extinction. There's actually no warrant in the round of why bioweapons cause extinction. So I think this is useful. That said, it's unclear if it matters because the neg is now going for a different argument about how conventional wars reduce the political focus on climate solutions, which is not technically a short circuit, but could be made to appear to be a short circuit, which would create the same weighing implication without an extinction scenario, i.e. without bioweapons, right?
Not nuclear weapons, and they have not explained why they caused extinction in the last speech. Check their own. So I'll handle their weighing. We're not going for time frame. We're already explained what we apply time frame flipping target. Also, not about we did not read target. We also have a scalar impact that gets worse every single day. We'll their argument. They say perception. We're not going for perception either. All their weighing is pointless. Case. The C3.
Okay, this is where I think Plano has the biggest chance to pull ahead because I think that if there's any part of the round that Strake might be behind on, it's their case. So let's see.
One thing we did. Okay, one thing we did from our. Okay, I already did that. Well, one thing we did the warrant why the bill won't fully pass on their second convention on politics. They say that our argument is a snapshot. No, the evidence indicates that Republicans or that the House only wants like 5 billion and the Senate wants about 1.6 trillion, which is a massive difference. It's not a snapshot. They don't agree on how much money has to be cut, which means it will not pass. It's not a snapshot.
I actually think this is a great articulation of this argument that Anuj could go for in the final focus because technically, like there's a response down here that looks my flex cell is being weird, but it looks like it's conceded, right? It says you have conceded that reconciliation will reduce instead of increasing the deficit. And not true, by the way, but let's pretend that is true. Even so, this articulation of the response that the Senate wants to cut more than the House still technically applies regardless of if this bill cuts money or adds money to the deficit. I think that's useful. It is a little bit of a new articulation, so that's a bit sus. But this is a viable argument, and it does respond to the your evidence is only a snapshot. And maybe it is still only a snapshot, but I don't really know what only a snapshot means. Like presumably the uniqueness evidence from the neg is also only a snapshot. Or maybe a broader snapshot, but still a snapshot. Like I don't know why like one is a snapshot and what one isn't. But I think this is a useful response. We just need to be implicating these more. Like, I just wish we got a little bit more treatment that was just like they have no responses that answer this, and also it's terminal, game over. And then he goes for the other one that I think is also good. But again, I feel like there's just a little bit lacking here, and we'll see that in the next extension.
On the second extension, they've conceded that there would be no backlash on their third argument because they've conceded on the contention too. The nuclear lobbying will overwhelm everything else. That was a dropped argument. They only frontlined it on their C2. Nuclear lobbying on their contention too. Okay, nuclear lobbying on contention 2 means it overwhelms on C2.
One thing about this, the implication is wonky here. I think it's smart to implicate the nuclear lobbying argument on contingent 2 against contingent 3 as well. It makes sense, right? The nuclear lobbying argument is that nuclear lobby is very strong. It will ensure that politicians don't backlash against nuclear energy, which means that there won't be cuts to the LPO. Empirically, it seems iffy because there are cuts to the LPO. So I'm not 100% convinced by that implication. But the problem here, more than anything, is that we're kind of missing an implication against contingent 2. Like, he's just applying a response that exists on contingent 2 against contingent 3, but we're no longer really explicitly applying the response on contingent 2 against contingent 2, which I think is the more useful part of this response, right? The more useful implication of this response. Because it does have a very damning effect, I think, if true, on the link of contingent 2, which maybe is implicit in this extension, but it could be much more explicit. Also, there's like some ink here that I think we have to deal with. It's not good ink. I don't think it's actually responsive, but it's still something that, I mean, it's there. If I'm a judge, I'm looking at it. I'm like, please respond to this.
C3 because none of their arguments triggered. Their C3, they conceded that Trump would not let.
Yeah, and now we're just like done with the C2, which means we're done with this response. And we still haven't touched the stuff about like natural gas being high or why lobbying isn't our argument. Like, at least Drake is saying stuff about how this does not apply to their argument. And even if that is not true, I don't think it is true. We're not saying that it's not true. So I mean, it's still possible to go for this, but I think it's like it could be much. The door is wider open before the summary than after the summary.
Fail because he would look back and see that he's made a massive investment, and that investment failed. It would look bad for him as a president. Also conceded the fact that we are building 40 reactors right now, and their arguments haven't triggered. So the empirics of this argument possibly the probability went here. I know the extension on C2 was not on C3, but the only one front line's there, and not on C3. That's it.
I don't know. Like, I kind of think the Trump response is through ink here. Because they said Trump is undertaking nuclear projects already, but we have evidence that proves that despite that, he is actively undermining them, which seems to disprove this. I mean, there's no warrant for that. Like, it's sort of a weird, like, evidence versus warrant debate, but there's no comparison from either side. And I guess, like, the assumed sequencing in this round is that the evidence would overcome. Plus, it's conceded, so it's like I don't really know. I think we could have done a better treatment of both contingent 2 and contingent 3 on their case. I think the best part of Armand's summary would be the weighing if it was not new. I think he was like actually fantastic on the line by line on the weighing, but a lot of it's new. And so instead, I think the best part of his summary is that he is very good at extending and frontlining very efficiently all of the stuff on case. I think that the pro case is like 100% true, but just not that great on the con case and not treating the weighing as dropped, which is a delicate treatment. We could still win the weighing despite dropping some premises, but we're not acknowledging that those drops exist. Okay, there was one sort of interesting thing that happened in Grand Cross, which is that the narrative from Strake about the link into warming shifted a tiny bit to include a short circuit about nuclear energy. That will come out in Jason's final focus as well. But we don't need to talk about it that much because we can just start watching. Okay, I cheated again. I flowed it before, but let's watch this final focus. So again, just before we start, Strake has to do one of two things to win: either win politics and win weighing, or win politics and win terminal defense. I think it's probably easier at this point in the round to win politics and weighing, but probably they will try both.
Going for politics, unique sentence from yesterday says the budget is passed out. Republican Union could overcome opposition. Nuclear aliens, Trump's-based gas lobby, and spending forces internal backlash. Another year, text, defense innovation, bottlenecks, and charging stable funding will cause the cost of America's conventional military innovation, which is or anything like prevent nuclear war. They say we don't have enough plutonium. Look, we are agreeing that American nuclear weapons are not up to shape or internally explicitly about conventional weapons, solving small-scale conflicts that cause Chinese firstly to the conventional nuclear symmetry. Conflict causing great power kills everyone. The bioweapons, the internally was extended and dropped. Our argument occurs instantly. Next, the case proper. They say the bill will not pass. They have continued their evidence that the deficit.
So we've got an extension. We have an interesting treatment on the like nuclear weapons uniqueness cross app. He says basically it doesn't apply because our argument is about US conventional weapons stopping China. I don't know that that means nuclear weapons from the US are not also key to stop China. Like it's probably true that conventional weapons are important. But I don't know why that means nuclear weapons are not also important, because this is a non-unique, right? This is like an alt cause to a loss of deterrence capabilities. So it might be that your cause of a loss of deterrence capabilities is different from this one, but this still also is sufficient to trigger the same impact scenario happening. So this technically doesn't answer the non-unique yet. Now he will frontline, I guess, the politics DA. So let's go down here. He already extended it. I guess this was part of the frontlining is frontlining the plutonium stuff. Now he has to frontline. Um, go back up here. Now he has to frontline the two responses that were extended, bro. Okay, here. The two responses that were extended in Armand's summary. First about the Senate wanting to cut more than the House and this disagreement between Republicans, and second about nuclear lobbying.
Will remain static. And our evidence presidents conceded Trump spearheads efforts. Second, they say that nuclear lobby constructs is irrelevant because they Trump the other links Trump based etc. They say nuclear war.
So again, I think this is a little bit light. We get a little bit more on this one. So Armand says the Senate wants to cut more than the House. The response is we have post-dating evidence that says the deficit will remain static. This technically is not a response to the dispute about how much to cut between the Senate and the House. So it doesn't matter that it postdates because it's not responsive. Then the other thing is that you've conceded Trump spearheads efforts, but one, this was definitely not cross-applied to this response anywhere else in the round. And second, it's sort of like there's no warrant ever why this would solve the dispute in Congress, which is where the bill actually would pass between these Republican groups. Like what evidence or warrant is there that Trump is sufficient to overcome these seemingly fundamental differences about the budget between the Senate and the House? Um, Also, again, not anywhere else before in the round. Uh, if you go through the ink on this specific response, it was not in the rebuttal, it was not in the summary. So this seems a little bit strange. I think this response is viable for the Plano final focus. The treatment of the other response is also not great, but again, the implication for the other response in summary was also not great. So who really cares? But I think the treatment is like shockingly not very comprehensive. Like the response seems to continue asserting this misunderstanding of the nuclear lobbying response, which is that it is irrelevant to the other links, like Trump and Republicans hating spending. I don't know why it's irrelevant. Like the whole argument about nuclear lobbying is that it overwhelms the other considerations, like Trump and like Republicans hating spending. So I don't think this is a response at all. There is like in the extension, he says the words gas lobby. Literally, I don't think there's a grammatical structure around that phrase gas lobby, but it exists, and that was earlier in the round used as a response to some extent, but not really explained. Like, who cares if the natural gas lobby is highest now? There's no explanation about why the natural gas lobby will overcome the nuclear lobby or why it will fight against nuclear energy. I guess maybe that's implicit in the extension, but I think this is dangerous. So I also think this is viable for Plano's final focus. But let's see what he does next. I guess so. He's now completely extended politics. So the next part is either weighing or defense. Probably weighing.
Creates bad, which Trump's case, but they've done, but it does not, because China views nuclear weapons as part of its conventional arsenal, which means they're not adverse to using it. Next, we'll do the weighing debate here first.
So this is kind of another response to the plutonium stuff. That MAD doesn't apply because China views nukes as part of its conventional arsenal. Um, Not 100% sure why this means MAD doesn't apply. Like, who cares if China views nukes as part of its conventional arsenal? The argument about MAD is that US nukes are part of our deterrence. If anything, this seems like it means that MAD applies more to the link story about conventional weapons, right? Like, if nukes are viewed as part of conventional, then a decrease in nukes happening inevitably very quickly will trigger the same impact as a decrease in conventional forces because of the failure of the reconciliation bill to pass. So, if anything, like I don't think this answers the non-unique at all. If anything, it strengthens the non-unique, and I think that could be a third viable defensive path for Plano and Final Focus.
The time wave was cold continued to leak into the triggers were after the military.
Let me find the weighing real quick. Gosh, having like the half screen flow with all this stuff flying around a little bit. I've also like sort of intentionally flowed more than I would normally in a round for the sake of the video, so it's kind of biting me now. Okay, the weighing is the very bottom of this side of the flow, and so here we go. He starts with the time frame weighing, which is, to be fair, conceded from rebuttal.
Incapable. The Bradley court says, quote, any delay funding increases risk independently. The worst cases that are already triggered within the year. It takes years to develop nuclear reactors, much as for those to solve. And
I think that it takes years to develop nuclear reactors is kind of new, given that it was over time in the last speech, and I guess through ink, because I mean, it doesn't matter that it's through ink because Plano is agreeing that they went time frame weighing, so who cares?
is already more than a year old, so be highly skeptical. Next, this time frame first linking they've dropped with a linking that causes war means that we can't solve climate change because people are distracted from the argument. Just break the two links. It destroys the link with the small scale comments. Also mean we're not focused on nuclear. They cannot.
This is new, right? That small scale conflicts mean we can't focus on nuclear. I think it popped up in the Grand Cross, but it certainly wasn't anywhere before in any speech in the round. Um, but it's unclear if this is like implied enough by the earlier link about like focus on climate solutions, because I guess nuclear is included under that. But this is sort of a paradigm issue. I think at the very least, like Plano could point out that this is new, because this is a true short circuit, which is different from just a link in.
Continue something and continue to penalize because words also admit next. They consider that you should break the cloud on time frame. If our product happens first, the product there should never happen to begin with. So you should break the two.
Now that I'm thinking about it, it's actually not a true short circuit. Short circuit. It's just like the resolution has a link into nuclear energy, and war has a link into nuclear energy. So Plano could feasibly still concede this and say that there is a net increase in nuclear energy, even if part of the resolution, a consequence of the resolution, is a decrease in nuclear energy. It's not on net. If you get me, this is also just like a link into nuclear energy that the resolution also links into. So there's room to compare between those links.
Between those and on time frame. Next, we'll answer the probability weighing. They drop since rebuttal that probability weighing is a subject of preference, so you should reject it because it is interventionist. The answers in second summary are new, so you should reject them. And us winning the dissent also means that we have 100% risk of probability. All continue.
The 100% probability thing is definitely through ink, but I don't know that it matters because it is true that probability is subjective and interventionist is dropped. So it might be tricky for Plano to try to go for probability weighing in Final Focus.
Arguments. I literally do not know how you affirm this debate. They have just dropped little politics this and we are winning time frame and winning debates. Next, their case, they have conceded there are no knock-on effects to our case. The impact events and deaths are down by 98% from knock-on effects. And green tech means that impacts are overestimated, which proves that their arguments are non-scalar because their alternatives are solved and they drop as a dimension that Trump's approach destroying the.
I'm a little bit skeptical about this new implication that like this means that the impact is not scalar. Like just because alternatives could solve doesn't mean that it's not a scalar impact, right? Like those alternatives are also scalar. This is like a mitigatory non-unique on solvency. But I don't know. I think it's like a sneaky application of this to the content. I don't think the judges would buy it this late in the round.
LPO, which means they cannot continue projects to begin with.
Now he's going for defense, which is again the other strategy that they could win is this impact defense. But the impact defense is not terminal. I don't think it really matters very much. I mean, he's trying to make it terminal by saying that this means it's not scalar. But I think this is, I don't know. I don't think that this is really possible at this point in the round, unless the judges are very charitable to that new interpretation. Um, let's see. The next thing that he does is he goes for, where am I? Here I am. The LPO stuff again. And there's a bit of newness here, but let's see.
Argument is also really easy, but we do not have the material and manpower to even supply nuclear energy in the first place.
So he goes for LPO, and then he sort of invents this new Doge argument. Doge was part of LPO to begin with, but there's like a new argument about how Doge means we don't have the manpower or the materials, which there was a materials shortage argument earlier in the round, but certainly not in summary. Certainly there was no manpower argument in summary, so this stuff is kind of new. Plus, it's a little bit weird that he's dropping the Trump won't let it fail reputational staking argument, because again, like that seems to be a very easy response to this that shores up the warming argument and prevents this from being terminal defense at all, or even really any defense. And it would have been trivially easy probably to just say like the Trump reputational argument was kind of through ink because Daniel's summary did answer it in a way that Armand didn't really handle. But we're kind of giving it away for free now. But I don't think this matters very much because again, like the primary way that Strake can win is through weighing, not through terminal defense. So this is just like creating extra annoying things for Anuja's final focus, but not things that are really threatening to win independently, in my opinion. It's just like extra stuff that Anuj has to say words on that makes it harder for Anuj to give a winning final focus. So we'll see how Anuj handles all of this. I think the probably the best way for Plano to win this round at this point. Like again, there's only two ways that Plano can win. Either win warming and win weighing, which seems very difficult given the things that were dropped earlier in the round, or win warming and win terminal defense, which seems slightly easier in this round because I think that Strike is not doing a very good job on their own case of like there's three different paths that you could go for terminal defense against Strake's argument. And I think any of them is honestly viable because I don't think that they did a great job of handling each one, even though there is ink on each one. So there are choices for Anuj in the next speech, but we'll see what he does. Okay, now let's listen to Anuj's final focus.
Can't go straight out of Plano focus. The efficiency external defense of the nuclear energy lobby industry is growing because there is no backlash to doing the act because nuclear lobbies will just convince politicians that it's a good thing. The Republicans are always happy, which means you can still pass the bill that they talk about. The spending always goes through no matter what. Their extension final focus is that there's internal backlash from Republicans. The efficiency there would not be backlash because the nuclear lobby industry is growing, which is trying to concede final focus. Zero is any risk of the net office because there's any risk of solving for some amount of climate change to win this debate. On our
I think this is exactly the right move. The only question now is if the judges buy that this defense is enough and is terminal, as in is enough to exist in the round, right? Like to be evaluated by the judges. So the judges will all have to go through their flow. For example, they'll have to compare this to the summary extension as well that says nuclear lobbying will overwhelm everything else. Unfortunately, again, as we said before, that summary extension is only implicated to C3 technically, and it only has very like implied effect on C2 at this point in the round, and it's not blown up very much. So this blowing up of the response seems somewhat new, although the treatment of the response is not really technically new at all. It'll have to get through that gateway of the summary narrowing. Plus, the judges will have to believe that the other links, like Trump and Republicans hating spending, etc., are also taken out by this defense. I think that Anush could do a slightly better job explaining, like explicitly stating at least, that these other links, the way that Jason tries to wiggle out of this defense, are actually also captured by this defense. Um, I think maybe just spending more time on this defense could make it much more effective. I also, again, think that there are other defensive options to go for that might even be easier at this point. For example, like the Senate wants to cut more than the House stuff, I don't think is well handled by Strake in this round. So I think those are other options to go for as well. But let's listen to the rest of the final focus. I mean, technically, I think this could be winning depending on the judge's treatment of it, depending on the interpretation of it. There's like there is an RFD you could give that says Plano wins off of this defense, but I think that there's also more valid RFDs that can like quantitatively more, right? Like there are more different valid RFDs that could be given by a technical judge against this defense as well.
argument. They have to see weakness and we do not have self-confidence right now. But they have to see that funding allows us to invest more in nuclear energy, which is a good thing. It gives more power reliable and displaces fossil fuels, account for 90% of emissions. And they have to see that cutting for every 0.1 degrees increase in Celsius kills one.
Okay, so he's extending case now, which, again, hypothetically, a case extension with terminal defense should be enough for Plano to win the round because, again, they just have to win warming plus the fact that politics is not true. Because all of the Strake paths to the ballot here hinge upon the assumption that politics is a true argument. So we're just doing case extension right here.
First thing I would, okay. First thing I would be look at the impact. Making mortality decreased 98%.
Or here, actually.
The front line that developing countries don't have access to technology. This was a front line grand crossfire, but not in battle focus. We still have an impact to people itself. The second thing they apply is the Doge argument. They have to see the front line that Doge doesn't matter. Trump will do whatever he can to make sure that nuclear reactors work to be staking public credibility on the invested billions.
Okay, so now they're going over to the Doge argument, which is, again, the same as the LPO argument. Where's the Doge argument? Wait, where is it? Oh, here. Yeah, here. So this is the final focus extension from Strake. Trump is getting the LPO, and Doge means they don't have material and manpower. The response is Doge doesn't matter because Trump will stake his reputation on nuclear and do whatever he can to ensure that it works, which takes out Doge because that, I guess, guarantees manpower and guarantees the LPO does get funding or something. I guess this implication again could be more explicit, but yes, this response is conceded across the last two speeches. There wasn't anything on it in Jason's final focus, and it probably does. I mean, it was originally implicated to apply to LPO as well, and it probably does apply to LPO. That implication seems to be conceded, which probably does take out this response. To boot, I think Anuj is extending this 40 reactors working now empiric as well, which seems to be proof of this response, but we'll see. And the whispering in the background here is about this part of the response that Doge means they don't have the materials for this, which technically Anuj is not responding to, although one, the Trump staking his reputation on this does implicate to this and was implicated to this earlier in the round, because if it is the case that Trump will stake his reputation and do whatever he can to ensure this, that also will increase materials. There's no warrant other than Doge in the final focus, and Doge is under Trump's control, at least to some extent. So this is reversible by the response. But also, this wasn't in the summary, so I don't really think it matters. Like, there's nothing about materials in Daniel's summary, so I don't really think that matters either way. Even if it was conceded from case, it wasn't extended in summary. This is where I think, I mean, again, I feel like the weighing debate from Plano's side is pretty good, but it assumes that things are not dropped. Like it assumes that these responses are not just new. Where is the weighing? It's down here. So I think it's a little bit difficult to win, but let's see what he says.
We preempted their responsibility when since rebuttal we said our argument is historically true. There's no reason why empirics are subjective. It's whether it is true, false, whether or not an empiric capital and empiric capital truth probability is not is subjective. And
I think like if Anuj wants to win this, he has to do a little bit more work than he's doing now on sort of Houdiniing it through and explaining exactly where it was in earlier speeches so that the judges don't just hack against it because they think that it's new, because they look over here on their flows and they see this sort of gap. I think he's attempting that, right? Like this was a preempt sense rebuttal. I don't know that the judges will buy that at this point in the round. I think if he wants the judges to vote here, he would have to do maybe a little bit more work trying to explain where it was in previous speeches and why this is not a new thing. And again, this is what he's attempting to do here. Like it was in my rebuttal, it was in the case. Look at the doc. The doc unfortunately doesn't say that empirics are objective or that empirics render probability not subjective. But I think it's a good try. Like I think this is an interesting way to try to win. There's a possibility that there's a way of phrasing this that makes it not seem new at all, or that at least acknowledges that there was a drop and then makes it not seem new, right? And that would be probably the most persuasive way to get the tech judges on board with this. I will try to investigate that after we finish this final focus to see if there is any path forward. But my main takeaway here is I think that Anuj is spreading himself too thin between two potential paths to victory, where he should be just picking one. Like you either will win with warming and weighing, or you will win with warming and defense. I think warming and defense intuitively is an easier path in this round than warming plus weighing. But he's trying to do both in 2 minutes. I think that just like in most cases, it's not the most strategic here because he ends up being a little bit light on both as well.
Don't vote on a high magnitude impact. Their impact in case is nuclear war. They don't vote on it because policy paralysis. You can justify that anything leads to infinity nuclear war because politicians are paralyzed because they can.
This is like technically true. They did concede policy paralysis. I think they should have at least said that policy paralysis is also new weighing that should have been earlier, which I don't remember Strake saying. Like it sort of is a new response because it doesn't just apply to extinction. It applies specifically to the time frame existential like short circuit stuff. But it is technically conceded. And I think that it might be dangerous for Strake, except for the fact that the weighing that they're going for at this point in the round does not depend on them winning an extinction impact. It depends on small scale conventional conflicts, depleting like political attention on climate solutions as a short circuit, which doesn't have to have like a high magnitude impact, which means that policy paralysis does not necessarily apply here. And you would have to have a very specific treatment of the policy paralysis argument in this round to imply that it's like some sort of terminal defense or something, or terminal on the weighing level against the politics scenario. I don't really think that there's a logical reason why it is.
Never acted with reason this is why you prefer probability over magnitude. They have to see our more probable. We're seeing people die from climate change. We're seeing
Again, like Strake can concede that you prefer probability over magnitude, but they're not really going for magnitude. They're going for a short circuit and time frame.
die from climate change right now. So if you just vote on 150 million people that are dying, the only thing I will have to handle then is that positive is that war means we would get distracted. But one line that Trump will make sure war takes it out, but see, distracted doesn't matter. If the energy is intrinsic.
This is an interesting cross application. He's cross applying some of the responses on the neg flow against specifically the LPO argument and saying that our response there about how Trump will stake his reputation on nuclear and shore it up means that they don't get a short circuit, which I think is smart and technically I think is actually valid in this round. It's not really new because the nuclear energy short circuit was new in the first final focus. So it's valid for Anuj to make this new cross application, but I think he needs to explain more why it is valid. And I also still don't know that it's enough. Because even if this is true, like you need to prove two things. One, you need to prove that Trump staking his reputation on this is sufficient to overcome the reprioritization away from nuclear or away from climate solutions toward conflicts. And that seems sort of dropped, so this is a difficult cross application. But two, you need to prove that even if this is true in the US and you still retain somewhat of a link, that the link in the rest of the countries where they're winning, that there's like a conventional conflict that distracts attention away from climate solutions is not just bigger, right? Because it seems like they still get some kind of a link into warming, even if it's not a true short circuit on US nuclear technology.
Clean. It means we can solve climate change itself. The way we do war is sustainable because we get our energy from nuclear, which means that what's implicated through our specific link, which means it does not take out the app. You can't vote on the straight case, so it's conceded terminal defense and final vote.
I think Anuj knows that the defense is the greatest, the like most likely way that they win, which is why he has this line at the very end. I think given that, I would actually advocate for a more radical treatment of the flow in Final Focus. Like I think you should just acknowledge, like, yeah, we're behind on the weighing. If they win their case, it might be game over for us. But fortunately, they blundered and they don't win their case. Here's either you go all in on one piece of defense, or you can spread yourself a little bit between multiple pieces of defense, which I think is also a viable strategy because if you have like three pieces of defense and Final Focus, it might be like you might psychologically kind of bargain with the judge to get them to vote on at least one, right? Like even if you don't want to vote on these other two pieces of defense, surely you'll vote on at least one of them. Like this third piece of defense, they've conceded that they've mishandled so many that like at this point you can't let them get away with it, even if you don't like all of the pieces of defense. So I think that there's basically three ways that Plano could potentially win this round. One, which is the hardest, is really trying to Houdini through the weighing. Because you are winning case. I don't think there's any terminal defense on the pro case in this round. Because I think that Straight kind of messed that up at the end. Two, I think much easier is to go for either two or three pieces of defense and then just go all in on defense, like terminal, this defense is terminal. We just win a risk of case, and that's pretty easy. Or three, go all in on one piece of defense in the final focus and just be like, they mishandled this one piece of defense. It is terminal. That's all we need to win. I think any of those three are potential ways to win. Um, I'm not sure which one between the last two is easiest, but we can experiment with it. So what I'll do now is I'll explain my RFD, and then I will sort of experiment with some different possibilities for how this final focus, for example, could have gone. Obviously, I think that the problems with Plano happened earlier than the final focus. Like the first problem was not responding to the weighing in second rebuttal. The second problem is not going for the defense and blowing it up in the best way in the second summary. But I think that it is possible to recover from some of those problems in the final focus if we don't spread ourselves as thin across these two different versions of the final focus that are both trying to win in a different way. If that makes sense. So first, my RFD, I think I probably would also vote Strake in this round. The biggest thing I need to like get through is I need to look at the defense from the nuclear energy lobby. I think there's a few problems with the defense for me. Really, the biggest problem is I think in summary, in Armand's summary, it's not really implicated against contention two. It might be implied, but there's no one tells me that it's terminal in Armand's summary, and I don't really know. I don't really see why it is. Especially because natural gas, like the other way I could vote against the defense is by saying like the natural gas lobby technically is in both summary and final focus, although it's not implicated against the defense in final focus. But that might be enough to make me skeptical on the defense. And because I think that Strake is so ahead on the weighing, that might be sufficient for me to vote Strake. But probably the easiest way for me to vote here is just be like, in Armand's summary, nuclear lobbying was not applied to this argument. And that's just that. It was applied to C3. It wasn't applied to C2. I don't know why, in summary, nuclear lobbying um, prevents squabbling over this bill um, specifically, or why it applies to the link on the DA. I know that some of the RFDs treated this a little bit differently and said sort of like the description and the treatment of the nuclear lobbying defense in Anush's final focus was a little bit too new, which I kind of get as well. I think it's technically not 100% new, or not new in any meaningful way. But I think it is definitely blown up in a way that it wasn't really in summary. I just don't know that that really matters to me. Um, and then the final way that you could sort of vote here is you could say, Strake has made a response in every speech in the round that says this lobbying argument does not apply to their other links, and Anuj does not explicitly apply it to the other links in Final Focus. So I'm left believing, even though I don't logically believe this, maybe it's least interventionist in this round to believe that these other links that are extended about Trump, pushing for this, or about the Republicans hating spending or something, are not taken out. It seems really weird because logically I don't really see why they're not taken out. But I guess that is another technically valid way to vote against the defense here. But any way you vote against the defense, I think Strake wins because I think it's clear that they're winning the weighing. Why are they winning the weighing? Because a lot of this stuff uh, in Armand's summary is new, where these two responses are conceded in rebuttal, right? Time frame first with short circuits is conceded. And I just think that Strake is winning time frame with short circuits. And so, plus, I think probability is subjective, is conceded, even if there are empirics in the AF case. That's not applied to this response until summary, which is probably too late. And the constructive speech does not say that those empirics are objective determinants of probability comparisons, which is what would have been needed to be a preempt. So I don't really believe in the treatment of this weighing in Final Focus. I don't think that Strike needs any magnitude or any extinction to win the short circuit on climate, or at least win some sort of link into climate that has a greater time frame, and that is an easy tiebreaker. If there's nothing else, if there's no magnitude weighing at all in the round, and Plano is just going for sort of a scalar warming argument against a scalar war argument, those kind of cancel each other out in terms of magnitude. So then time frame would be the only thing left for me. Um, Plus, Anuj doesn't extend the link from climate change into war, which could be a different tiebreaker. I don't know that it would be enough. It probably wouldn't be enough anyway. Um, but that means I believe that Strake is probably ahead on the weighing. So Strake wins politics, they win weighing, which means they win the round. This is, I think, how the two judges who voted Strake voted in this round, um, which makes complete sense to me from a technical perspective. So the only way to justify a ballot for Plano at this point in the round is if you think the nuclear lobby defense is terminal, which I think is fair, to be honest. Like it's really close here because I think both sides are making some mistakes with their treatment of this defense in summary and final focus in the round. And so it would be justified, I think, for someone to construct a ballot that says the defense is terminal, therefore I vote Plano. But we want to find out what can make Plano decisively win, not just win because of a difference in paradigm, for example. So I'm going to try to construct a few different versions of what I think Final Focus could have looked like, and then we can evaluate whether we think they would actually be persuasive or whether we think that they would tip Plano over the edge to winning. So I'll be back in 1 sec. Here's my attempt at a Plano Final Focus that only does weighing. Again, I think this is the hardest way for them to win, but I think it's maybe theoretically possible. I'm going to try to do it. So see if you think this gets us closer. No one did magnitude weighing, dropped extinction causes policy paralysis, and impact defense doesn't apply to the impact to be extended. So we're only looking at time frame and probability. On time frame, yes, if they win time frame and a short circuit, they win the round, but only if there's a short circuit. They didn't extend the extinction short circuit from rebuttal because they conceded policy paralysis. There was no short circuit in summary, just a new warming link about climate focus that loses the link weighing to our empirics that say nuclear energy is the best and only climate solution. The nuclear energy short circuit is new and final. One, that's too late, don't evaluate it, massive strats queue, and two, I get new responses. Their internal link to nuclear is unlikely, uncarded, and small because nations actually increase investment in resilient energy production during times of war to fuel campaigns. Countries like Russia are in wars and increasing nuclear, prefer this over zero war and articulated in final. Three, wars end, but durable fiat ensures our investment continues infinitely, so we have the strongest internal link to nuclear energy solving warming. Next, probability. No, your speculative scenario does not start with 100% probability. Your authors say could, not new, conceded from constructive. No probability comparison isn't terminally subjective, even though we concede it is inherently subjective. Empirics do ground it. Also dropped from constructive. For example, every investment in nuclear has displaced otherwise rising fossil fuels, has reduced emissions, has saved millions of lives from air pollution, accounting for their impact even stats my case extension. But despite 40 expensive reactors already being under construction, zero political backlash has happened. We should have seen some evidence of their link if their authors were right. This is simple. They have proven objective probability weighting is generally difficult. They give no warrant why it is impossible, and they concede functional methods for objectively comparing probability from constructive specific to this case. Their link defense is A, fundamentally a time frame argument, not probability, since neither Trump nor Doge are permanent, and conceded empirics prove that accounting for delays from resource shortages, every investment does eventually succeed. And B, it is through Inc. conceded Trump will stake his political legacy on nuclear when he passes it, which unlocks resources and manpower. Finally, C, they fumbled the link defense on their case. The nuclear lobby is booming and will reverse nuclear backlash from politicians, even if they care about the budget. Cross applies to our case by unlocking resources and manpower and independently indicts the probability of their link. Again, probabilities upstream of the short circuit. Even if voting pro makes their link more likely, the probability of their link chain fully manifesting approaches zero and is necessarily lower than our probability. They have shifted their terminal impact to nuclear energy with the short circuit. So you're comparing two links to the same endpoint. Probability controls that comparison. Time frame does not. I'll take a 1% risk of decking nuclear energy now for a 100% guarantee of supporting it in the future. So I think that could win under some technical paradigms. The thing I was trying to focus on the most was Houdiniing through the weighing and sort of re-articulating the content of constructive and specifically like acknowledging we conceded stuff, right? But like, what did we concede? Did we concede that their case outweighs? No, we conceded that certain things are true. For example, we conceded that probability is generally subjective. We conceded that it's judge intervention to vote on subjective probability. We conceded that time frame with a short circuit, for example, extinction, does necessarily outweigh. But we didn't concede that their case has all of these components, or that, for example, probability is that like judge intervention on probability is like the worst thing in the world, or anything like that. And so I think there's technically still room to try to make the case for probability weighing. It is just very difficult. I think many judges would still vote against it. So next, I'll try out the other methods of going for defense instead. Okay, here's my attempt going only for the defensive response that Anuj went for. I actually think this might be the hardest of the three defensive responses to go for. Maybe the cross application of uniqueness from case is harder. But I think there's at least one easier piece of defense. So this is still not the best version of the final focus, but I'll try it anyway. Okay. Their final focus conceded terminal defense. Here is a quote from rebuttal. Nuclear lobbying overwhelms. This outweighs anyone against government spending because lobbyists control their election outcomes and pay them off, which can overcome their personal beliefs. This means Republicans can still do the bill because they have new ties with lobbyists. This was extended in summary, and now here it is in final focus. Is the defense true? Yes. One, there is nothing on it in their final focus. The closest they get is Trump cares about spending, etc. But one, their link is about the legislative branch, which is the point at which our defense applies. So they needed to articulate why Trump applies to our defense. And two, our warrant preempted this. Even Trump is still a politician and enough lobbying overcomes government spending concerns, which is dropped. Two, they dropped through three speeches that 40 expensive reactors have been approved for construction by Trump and the Republican-controlled Congress. Now, if their authors were remotely close to correct about their link, there should have been some evidence of backlash, but there is zero, which is conceded empirical proof that the defense is true and terminal. Is it terminal? Yes. One, it was their burden to suggest it was mitigatory. Instead, they conceded from rebuttal and summary that this means the Republicans will pass the bill despite the AF, since there will be agreement on the nuclear spending question, which is terminal. Two, there was was no warrant extended in final, why Republicans will backlash against nuclear energy. So your threshold for terminal defense should be quite low, if not zero. The only thing you know for sure is that every past investment in nuclear energy has empirically displaced fossil fuels, reducing air pollution and saving millions of lives. Risk of offense is all we need because all their responses are mitigatory and through ink. The impact defense doesn't apply to the impact we extend. They're behind on the Trump and Doge responses. One conceded Trump stakes his political legacy on nuclear success once he passes it, which unlocks resources and manpower. Two, the nuclear lobby defense cross applies here by ensuring politicians support nuclear energy. And three, worst case, this just postpones our offense since neither Trump nor Doge are permanent, and despite delays, every nuclear investment has succeeded eventually. Yes, they are ahead on the weighing, but they got too cocky with front lines, so their link is literally zero. They do not get a repeat TOC championship because they've conceded terminal defense and final focus. Literally, I beg you, look at the flow. Where have they answered this terminal defense and final focus? Nowhere. They just articulate their links again, but they fail to understand that this applies to their internal link to which all of their links apply. Therefore, no Strake repeat. I don't know, something like that. I think this gets you maybe to winning in front of most judges. But I wanna experiment with the last version of this because I think that there's a version where we could go for other defense and make this even more clear. So I'm gonna try that real quick and then come back. Okay, I cooked up a last version which includes all three of the potential pieces of defense. So let's see if you think this could be winning. All right. Voting for them means millions of developing countries will die from climate change without the technology to adapt. But nuclear energy empirically reduces emissions 75%, saving lives, and Trump will guarantee this once the app happens because it will stake his political legacy on it, unlocking resources and overcoming barriers like LPO and Doge. They're winning weighing, true, but at least we're winning a link. Final Focus fumbled three pieces of terminal defense. If you believe one, it's game over. One, maybe the bill keeps the deficit static, but there is unresolved disagreement about whether or not it should. House Republicans want to cut billions, but the Senate Republicans want to cut trillions. These are issues that cannot be resolved in the span of the few days by which they post date. They've conceded this indicts the warrants in their cards. Trump spearheads efforts as a new cross application in their final with no warrant. He's spearheading conflict, not agreement. Also, read their uniqueness evidence again. It does not say the bill is budget neutral or even that the issues are being resolved. I'm not saying drop them for this, but I am saying drop the assertions that were never in the card to begin with. Otherwise, you teach everyone here you can win by gradually twisting the meaning of your author in the back half. Two, the nuclear lobby is OP and will sway Republicans, which ensures that there's no backlash. Literally, the only thing Jason says about this in final is that they have other links. What our argument is that politicians are motivated to support nuclear energy by a lobby that overpowers their other concerns. How exactly do your other links get around this? They all have to go through the same internal link, which is politicians in Congress, which is where this defense applies. This is a huge mistake because we've been telling you this is terminal since second constructive. Three, we're about to run out of plutonium pits for our nuclear arsenal. Yeah, their argument is conventional, so what? There are multiple ways to hurt US conventional deterrence. One is to hurt our conventional forces, which is their link, but another one is to hurt our nuclear forces. US nuclear weapons are mainly meant to deter conventional weapons, after all. That's why this is a terminal non-unique. Their internal link about America losing some deterrence is going to trigger either way, so the politics TA makes actually zero difference. You can't fumble three pieces of terminal defense and final focus and expect to win TOC finals. I don't care how ahead you are on the weighing. If you're not winning a link, you're not winning this round. Okay, I don't know about you, but honestly, I think that's winning. I mean, obviously, I have the benefit of like 100,000 years to prep this and like 2020 hindsight. But I think that is probably winning. So the takeaway from all of this is like you win by either proving that you win your case and you win weighing, or if you win your case and you win terminal defense, assuming that both teams agree that terminal defense exists. Um, I think that the main takeaway here is just you should not always try to do both at the very end of the round. Sometimes you're very clearly losing on one, and you should just go for the other one. Like sometimes it is most effective to just acknowledge where you're behind in the round. Like if you're behind on defense on their case, you should just be like, yeah, they're winning a link, but we're winning the weighing. If you're behind on the weighing, as I think Plano probably was in this round, unless you believe that the first final focus I gave is winning, then you can say like, yeah, we're behind on the weighing, but you're losing all of your links, so it doesn't matter. And then I think if you don't spread yourself thin between trying to go for both strategies, it's much more likely that you'll actually be able to win. Overall, I think this is a fantastic round. It's TOC finals for a reason. I think that all of four of the debaters gave like literally incredible speeches that had a lot of genius moments throughout them. Um, so I'm really happy to be able to give this round analysis, and I think it's very educational for everyone watching. I hope that everyone learned a lot from it. If anyone has any questions about any part of the round, or you want me to talk about Crossfire for some reason, then just put a comment in the YouTube, and I will answer those as quickly as possible. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you could take some lessons from this analysis. And if you want me to do more things like this pretty soon, I'm happy to. I will have a lot more free time, especially over the summer. So I might do some extra like round analysis of other PF rounds, or even maybe of some like policy and LD rounds in the context of PF concepts to try to sort of introduce how you can look at those rounds from a PF perspective. I think all of those things are also educational. So stay tuned for those, and thanks again for tuning into the channel.